Hello and welcome to SpyHards podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I am Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, smash away, Executioner. Smash away.
Are we talking about the film?
We are talking about the film, I suppose.
Well, we are here once again, as usual, in your podcast feeds, talking about another interesting spy film. We're definitely going into the depths of unknown spy films here, Cam. What have we got?
Yes, we are tackling 1937's Lancer Spy, which, yeah, you're right, it is quite obscure. Readily available on YouTube, archive.org. There's links, of course, in the show notes, as always, when that's the case with movies. But one that, like, if you look it up on Letterboxd, for example, not a lot of people have watched this film.
Yeah, it's just us.
Yeah.
It's just us. And someone who wrote down, this film gave me the George Sanders crying whilst hugging a St. Bernard content I never knew I needed.
Well, I guess that's my review for the week.
Yeah.
I'll see you later, Scott. You can handle this one on your own.
Yeah, me and Emmeline on letterboxd.com will bring you the rest of this review.
Should have had her on as a special guest.
Should have. But yeah, why did we pick this one, Cam?
I think it was just luck of the draw. I think it was a case of, when we go through our master list, we've got all the stuff you guys know. So, your Bonds, your Mission Impossibles, Bournes, all that kind of stuff. Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, kind of all the big spy stuff. But we like to tackle obscure stuff. So we have a list of all this stuff from the 30s and 40s and 50s that haven't necessarily had long legacies or have, in some cases, disappeared due to poor distribution. But sometimes there's real gems in the rough. We talked about Five Fingers fairly recently that we loved. And that is not a movie that there's any major push to get in front of people. There's no Criterion editions, no Kino editions. Like, there are genuinely great spy films out there hiding, and our goal is to try to find them sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's important for not only the longevity of the show, but also just enhancing and informing our discussion and debate about spy films to watch where a lot of these things came from. I mean, this is not our earliest film. That was actually quite recently with The General in terms of when it was released. But, this is still from the 1930s, relatively early in, film's legacy as a whole. I mean, we're almost, 80 years removed from this film now?
Yeah, and I mean, what can you really say about the spy genre if you just decide that your in point for the entire genre is the 60s movement of, like, Bond forward? There's so much stuff that the decades before that lead into all the types of spy storytelling that is, I think, more beloved or more famous.
And let's be fair, the 1930s wasn't devoid of hit films. The 39 Steps, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Alfred Hitchcock was cranking out some gold at this point.
Mata Hari, that's another one. Not Hitchcock, but Greta Garbo star vehicle, yeah.
Sure thing. And these films, I feel like, inform our discussion on the later decades, because the directors of the films in the 60s and 70s were watching these films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of the writers as well who were looking back at espionage films of the past when they were looking to tell modern stories. And even, you look at a classic like The Man Who Knew Too Much remake. It helps a lot to go back and watch that original and see how Hitchcock decided to improve upon the formula, what he enjoyed about that movie, what he didn't like as much about the original and wanted to improve upon. So there's a lot in terms of the past of spy films for sure.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Let's lance this spy, rip our shirts off and do some fencing in the park. Before we get into it, here is your letterboxd.com synopsis. Lance the spy. Her kisses were death traps. An Englishman impersonates an imprisoned German officer and returns to Germany to become a national hero. A female German spy is assigned to check him out, but falls in love with him.
Yeah.
That's the film. That is the film.
That is the film. I mean, I guess when it comes to some of these more like, shorter, somewhat simpler 1930s films, the synopsis isn't too hard, which is why some of them are like 8 words long.
That's true. But Cam, we've been prancing around in the park with our shirts off fencing for too long. Let's talk about it. How did we get Lancer Spy.
Okay, so the behind the scenes, I feel like might be more interesting than the movie. There needs to be a
Ooh.
movie about the author of the book. There is a movie we will tackle called I Was a Spy from 1933 about the author of the novel Lancer Spy, but I feel like we need a proper one, like a genuine A-quality picture about the author, Martha Knockhart McKenna, who she was a Belgian spy, Scott, working for the UK and its allies during World War One.
Okay.
Right there. The credentials. Written by a spy. How often do we get to say that? I guess Ian Fleming.
It actually is few and far between. You look at a lot of spy authors, they maybe have worked around the secret services, but weren't actually out in the field.
Yeah. Like, this is someone who genuinely was in the field during World War One. She was a nurse, so she entered the military as a nurse. But because of, her profession, she was able to become an agent. She operated under the codename Lorre. And because she was a nurse, she could get close to German military personnel and then pass on information to the Allies. And she mostly at the time worked with two female Belgian spies. There was an elderly woman who was a vegetable seller named Canteen Ma, and a letterbox agent named Number 63.
Canteen Moore sounds like a Star Wars character.
It does. Which of us is going to be more likely to be Canteen Ma?
Well, you said she was in her 60s, so we know which one you are.
I didn't even say 60s. I said elderly.
Oh, well, I think we've already answered that one. I guess I'm number Agent 66, was it?
63. Number 63.
Number 63. I'll be number 63. You can be Canteen Moore.
So, like, McKenna had like a really interesting spy period because obviously all this stuff going on with getting close to German personnel, but even like she was approached and someone who was a German lodger in her house tried to recruit her to become a German spy, and she had him killed.
That got dark. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you are right though. So far, this sounds like a film.
Yes, and ultimately McKenna was arrested after attempting to bomb an ammo dump. And she, I guess, during the process of planting these bombs in a sewer, part of her bracelet or something broke off, which had her initials, and gave her away.
Oh.
And so they captured her. She was sentenced to death, but then that sentence was turned into a life imprisonment sentence. But then after armistice, 2 years later, she was freed.
They found her from her initials on half of a bracelet. That is some CSI level investigative work from the Germans.
How is this not a movie, Scott? Like a real movie.
Yeah. This has actually got a much better story than most of the stuff that's on TV these days.
Yeah. I know, right?
Yeah. I mean, even if this wasn't like a big blockbuster tentpole action film, this could at least be a Netflix release.
Yeah. So I am in favor of the TV show, McKenna, Spy.
McKenna, a spy.
Yeah.
Listen, screenwriters of the world, if you're listening, there's a free story here. I doubt anyone owns the rights to it. Right away.
Yeah. And so after the war, she became a novelist and wrote like a dozen spy novels, also a biography, or I guess autobiography about herself. And she published the novel Lancer Spy in 1937. She would later say that it was a sequel to My Master Spy, which was one of her earlier novels.
So this book was published the same year the film came out.
That's right. The rights to it were purchased by 20th Century Fox. They would float out advanced copies of the book in terms of building up promotion and whatever, and the studio, obviously a reader at a studio came across it, handed it off to the execs, and they loved it, and boom, it was sold.
Easy as that. Easy as that. If you had an autobiography, Cam, which I'm sure you'll write one of these days because you are a self-professed super genius.
It's true.
What would you call your autobiography?
Canteen Ma.
Perfect.
And the working title of this film was Life of a Lancer Spy, eventually shortened to Lancer Spy. I don't know that I would call it Life of, because I don't really know that we got that much of a depiction of the life of a Lancer Spy in this movie.
And to be fair, for a film that's got the word Lance in the title, there were no Lancers.
Also true. And so this movie, was directed by Gregory Ratoff, who was a Russian-born writer, director, producer, actor. He was a quadruple threat. He was also a World War I vet. He'd worked in Moscow theater, become an actor in the early 20s in Russian films, and then moved to the U.S. And, I mean, this guy, he's really interesting because he started off as an actor in the 1930s, very early on, and put out 5 movies in 1932, including, like, there was Symphony of 6 Million, which starred Irene Dunne, who was a big star at the time. And he was also in What Price Hollywood. He was about 4th billed in that film. What Price Hollywood title probably means nothing to you. What Price Hollywood has been remade several times as A Star is Born.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
I film I actually really enjoy the sort of Chris Christopherson one anyway.
Yeah.
That was originally called What Price Hollywood?
Yes, and then they did a remake very short number of years later called A Star is Born, and they would kind of change them up where, like, the first official A Star is Born was about an actress, and then they would kind of change it to the point where you get to the Lady Gaga one and she's like a musician, kind of a pop star.
Okay. And it is kind of about, like, what happens to you when you get famous and things like that. So the What Price Hollywood title makes sense. I get it.
Yeah. So around the mid-30s, Ratoff decided to move into directing. And if you look it up on IMDb, his first movie is listed as Sins of Man, which was a 1936 film about an Austrian church bell ringer played by Don Amici, who tries to impart his love of music onto his 2 sons. That movie, I believe, was shot after Lancer Spy, but maybe released first, because anywhere you look it up, Lancer Spy is regarded as his directorial debut. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that seems to be the case of just release order. But he had, in terms of his directorial career, he didn't really have anything that you would say was like a big classic film to his name, but he just worked with like a lot of stars. He did a movie with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. called The Corsican Brothers, Betty Grable, a movie called Footlight Serenade, and Myrna Loy, a movie called If This Be Sin. So someone who just worked with a lot of the big stars at the time, just not with their maybe classic vehicles.
Here comes Cam Smith dumping on the career of Gregory Ratoff.
Well, you know what? Little later, I'll talk about some of his acting credits, and some of them are pretty darn impressive. But he was also a writer and did uncredited rewrites and helped adapt Lancer Spy to the screen, which you wouldn't know. He was also originally cast as one of the supporting players in this movie as a head man behind German lines. And that ultimately was recast just because I think he was busy with directing and really couldn't focus on acting.
Is that meant to be the sort of police chief?
I'm going to guess so, because they were very vague. I believe I read this on the American Film Institute website. It might have been Turner Classic Movies, one or the other, but they didn't specify the character name.
I mean, the only person that really is sort of the head is there's 2 people. There's the count or the lord or whatever it is, and then there's like the head of the secret police.
Yeah, I'm going to guess the kind of that blustery head of secret police.
Yeah, I think so. We'll talk about that guy in a bit. But yeah, I think that's probably who he was going to play.
Right. And so, yeah, he didn't have any credit for writing on this movie. The credit went to Philip Dunn, who pretty prolific writer in classic Hollywood. Began in 1932 with uncredited work on a movie called Me and My Gal, which was a Spencer Tracy film at the time. But like very quickly really made a name for himself. A couple years later, he did an adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo that was a hit. In 1936, he wrote The Last of the Mohicans, which was remade many years later as a classic Daniel Day-Lewis, Michael Mann film that we all know. And in 1941, he wrote How Green Was My Valley for John Ford, which won the Best Picture that year, beating out Citizen Kane. And he wrote one of my favorite movies of all time, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, which actually had a supporting role by George Sanders in it. But a few other things. He also wrote The Robe, which was a Richard Burton biblical epic that I'm sure some people have seen. It's not one of my favorite biblical epics, but it's a very big, expensive one.
I'm more of the Bible in the beginning kind of guy.
Who isn't?
Well, some say I'm still watching it. It's that long.
You're going to have to watch that one day because it comes up, it seems, a lot when we do behind-the-scenes stuff.
It haunts me. It haunts me, much like the venereal disease, but that's a whole other problem.
That was another movie. Mom and Dad, I think that was called. And so Philip Dunn would ultimately move into directing in the mid 50s, and kind of similar to Ratoff, where it's like a string of movies. I think he did 10, but nothing that's like a big hit, but just some notable star vehicles. Like he directed a Richard Burton movie called Prince of Players, a Ray Milland film, kind of a Cold War courtroom drama called Three Brave Men, and then a Gary Cooper film called 10 North Frederick. Again, these are not like big prestige titles, but again, like Ratoff, working with a lot of big stars at the time.
So they're both, Ratoff and Dunn, steady hands.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. The sort of easy go-tos at studio, like, oh, he could do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Especially if this novel is the rights to it are snapped up very quickly to movie release. They wanted this thing out quick.
Sure. And we're still talking about it now.
Mm-hmm. We are indeed.
We may be the only one. I think I can confirm we are the only one. The film has 4 reviews on IMDb.
Only 4, huh?
Critic reviews. There's 6 users too, so I guess 10. 10 people have seen this film. We can confirm that much.
I think there's 12 reviews on Letterboxd, yeah.
So currently 22 people we can confirm, unless there's a crossover between the 10 and the 12. 22 people plus us. There are at least 24 people that can say they've seen Lancer Spy.
But we have cornered the market on Lancer Spy podcasting.
Oh, for sure. All handful of people listening will be big. They'll be lancing their nearest spy anytime soon.
And so this was the first lead role for George Sanders, who, beloved actor, just unbelievable. And I think we've all seen George Sanders in something. I think to people of a certain age, they will know him as the voice of Shere Khan in the Disney Jungle Book, which was the first introduction I ever had. But, he's in Hitchcock's Rebecca, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, All About Eve. He is just one of the great actors of his time. And he'd been playing kind of smaller roles. This was his first starring role. And I found notes online that there was original talk that Michael Whalen, who was kind of an obscure, somewhat B actor, was rumored for the role. I couldn't find this on like kind of your AFI kind of really, credential sources. But I looked up Michael Whalen. His best credit was probably in a Shirley Temple movie called The Poor Little Rich Girl, where he was like 5th or 6th billed. But his name is sometimes attached to this movie, but George Sanders clearly was the right choice, and became a huge star shortly after.
I have some things to say about George Sanders, but I will save that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. As for the female lead, French actress Germaine Ossie was initially hired to play this role and was replaced by Dolores Del Rio once production began. Couldn't find any reason why, but if you look at Germaine Ossie's IMDb page, I think all of her credits are in French films, so there may have been some issues with language there.
That's fair enough. It's interesting that you mentioned George first, but Dolores is actually credited as the first actor on the film.
But would Germaine Ossie have been credited first? That's the question.
Well, I think that depends on your mileage with George Sanders.
Oh, Scott, you're making me nervous.
Well,
another actor. This movie actually had a lot of weird recasting situations where usually when we talk about movies, there's usually like 1, maybe 2. This one had a few.
The central concept of this film is about recasting, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Colin Clive was cast as Colonel Fenwick. Colin Clive, best known as Dr. Frankenstein in the Universal horror films Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, like some of the all-time great horror films, had severe alcoholism and left this movie due to illness and died in 1937 of pneumonia caused by alcoholism. So, yeah, he was replaced by Lionel Atwill, who's just like one of those kind of classical supporting characters who's in probably almost every movie you've ever seen from this time period.
Just one of those guys that sort of rolls from set to set, collecting a paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, it's how I'd like to navigate Hollywood.
Yeah. Always reliable. Always delivers.
Yeah, I want to be like, one of those background actors one day where they're just kind of in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like Tony Todd, great actor. He's in everything.
Yeah.
But has he ever had really like the role?
Candyman.
You say that, but like I've never seen Candyman.
I'd say Candyman's probably his most iconic role.
Sure, but like when you say Tony Todd, do people instantly go to Candyman?
I think so. But I will say this, like, especially in the early 90s when you're making Candyman, horror is a little disreputable as a as a genre. So it's not until later years where Candyman is recognized as a more important film. So I don't think it gave him necessarily the career bump he might have gotten now if he were to make a movie like that.
I'm sure a remake of Candyman is on its way.
Already came out 2 years ago, Scott. Where have you been?
I haven't had enough candy, clearly.
And there was also 3 Candyman sequels.
And a baby?
Not a baby yet.
Oh.
Child of Candyman has yet to come out.
Oh.
Another weird casting story. The role that is the character of Fritz Mueller in the film, which is played by Fritz Feld. Originally, the studio cast an actor named Leonid Kinski, who I'm not particularly familiar with, but part of the criteria for him getting the job...
It's just the way you're like, well, I'm not particularly familiar. Who is? Cam, who is familiar with Leonid, whatever his name is?
Well, the story is what's entertaining, not necessarily the grand personality of Leonid Kinski.
Leonid Hard starts next week, folks. Tune in.
He was cast with the criteria that he had to have a short haircut for the role. And so he went and got the haircut, and then they didn't give him the job. So they had to pay him $500 for having done this to leave the movie, basically.
It's no wonder you gravitated towards that story because you've been asked to leave many places.
Now in Hollywood, there is actually in most contracts the Leonid stipulation to guarantee employment.
And that is his legacy. That's why we all think of Leonid today.
I like that the stipulation is named for his first name, not his last.
It's about as memorable as his career.
Yeah.
Oh, that was low. I'm sorry, Leonid. We love you.
We do. I'm sure we'll talk all about Leonid star vehicles in upcoming episodes of SpyHards.
I just hear everyone clicking unsubscribe.
I could not find any financial information for this movie whatsoever. Not even...
Cam, listen. This is like one of the longest behind the scenes you've ever done, and you've picked it for Lance the Spy. Could you not just like mediate what you do when it comes to the research? I mean, God. All right, what were the numbers? Come on.
Don't have any. Couldn't find them anywhere. Couldn't even find a sentence saying the movie was a success, for example, or a bomb. I couldn't find mention of anything. All I can tell you, the top 3 for the year, number 1 was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Number 2 was Saratoga, which was a Clark Gable, Jean Harlow romantic comedy. And then third place was Maytime, starring Jeanette MacDonald as an aging opera star who looks back on her life.
Very dramatic sentence there. Well done, Cam.
And just a couple of final notes on this film. George Sanders would go on to win Best Supporting Actor for All About Eve in 1951, and also would co-star in that movie with director George Ratoff, who would appear as the character Max Fabian. That is an all-time classic movie from the director of Five Fingers. I recommend you check out All About Eve if you haven't seen it.
Can you imagine on the set of that film, at one point they were like, God, do you remember Lance the Spy? What a good set that was.
Do you think it came up? It had to, right?
It had to. Is that their only connection? They never worked again?
I can't say that. I didn't go through every single credit, that George Sanders ever made.
There goes your credibility, young man.
I know. And actually, you should just note, too, that Gregory Ratoff closed out his career in 1960 with an appearance in the Paul Newman film Exodus, and he died that same year. So that is a movie that is... it's a bit of a journey to get through. It's quite a journey, but that does mark the final big on-screen appearance of Gregory Ratoff, the director of Lancer Spy.
It truly was his exodus.
A grand exodus it was.
That was bad. Well, Cam, thanks for the breakfast and the shirt, and of course the behind the scenes on Lancer Spy. But let's get into it. What do we think of the film? I'm going to go first.
please.
George Sanders, man.
Uh-oh.
I got a lot to say about George Sanders. Now, I've not seen any of these films that won him awards.
Sure.
I'm sure in the 15
You've seen The Jungle Book, right?
the original. Okay, I've seen his voice work.
Yeah, okay.
I've heard his voice work. In this film, I give him credit. He is pulling double duty. He's playing two characters. I got a lot of time for him. But by golly, is he as stiff as the uniform he's wearing. It is. I find this film to be utterly impenetrable in any way, shape, or form. I felt zero emotion both times I watched it. It's not like it was a bad film. I think the concept is actually quite intriguing. I've seen these sorts of stories before, almost like Freaky Friday-esque in a way, where the body swapping, but nothing about it got its claws into me almost. And I was hoping George would sort of step up to the mark and be entertaining, but he's just kind of. It feels like he's just sort of there in the scenes, like because he's playing this bumbling German in the latter half of the film, and I just got that impression that was it. There was nothing else to the film. I was just utterly not bored, but just frustrated watching it, I have to say.
It's interesting because I think I enjoyed his work in this more, but did it feel to you a little bit, because this is a 20th Century Fox American film, that they were playing it very like stiff upper lip British, often at the expense of any sort of emotion?
Yes, perhaps, although I think that also implies to the sort of German side of things too. They also have sort of that sort of upright attitude about things. And I will give this film a tick for also starting off with British Parliament, which is what all films of this decade should be doing, I would say.
I also loved that it had the bold words, all in caps, espionage across the screen.
That'll probably be the banner for our Twitter page that for the week this is out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. There's bits I enjoyed about this film. I like the plot. I like what it's trying to do. I think any film where the main character's nickname is Putsy is gonna get at least one mark for me. But its lead, which it hinges on, doesn't work for me. And the other part this film hinges on, which is a love story, is the most out of the left field choice. I was like, 1 minute she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm lying my way to get to know you," and then the next week she's like, "I'm going to betray my entire country to help you."
Yeah, let's put that one on the back burner for a little bit. I think there's a category where I will be talking about that somewhat at length because
That's
yeah.
fair. That's fair. But what do you think?
So this one, it entertained me. I found it a very quick, breezy watch. It is a movie that feels like kind of a B movie programmer, because in those days you'd get double features and you may have something like an A picture, which could be, I don't know if the years quite line up, but say like a Bringing Up Baby, which I think was the next year, but like there's your A picture. And then maybe you have Lancer Spy as your B movie lead in. In that regard, I found this movie quite entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
It has a really fun concept that I haven't really seen before, at least played out in the way it's done here, where you have this double for a German prisoner of war and sending him in to run an espionage mission. I liked kind of how it portrayed all like the infighting of the Germans. It felt in many ways like it was also commenting on the rise of Germany's powers leading into World War II, which is going to be a couple years later. It felt like there was a little bit of commentary going on there.
Sure.
That was probably richer for an audience back then than maybe it is now. Like maybe it's a little bit lost on me, but I think an audience then would have really appreciated it. It has several sequences or bits that I was like, oh, that's kind of clever, or that's fun to see, and the sort of thing we would see develop more. Like there's some action in this that's of its time, but I appreciated that it was trying to do kind of like a fast-paced, suspenseful sequence. There's memorable moments throughout, which is something I pray for, because you and I have tackled a couple of these really old films, especially ones that are like barely over an hour, where there's just so little to kind of comment on, or they feel just a little too simple or superficial. Whereas like this one, I was making a lot of notes, and there was a lot of even just like quirky parts that I was like, oh, we got to mention that on the podcast. That's really fun. So it entertained me in that way. But I agree with you when it comes to like, the love story and kind of working as a fully fleshed out, immersive espionage story, it leaves you wanting a little bit. But as sort of a fun 80 minutes to sit and watch, I was entertained.
I mean, that's entirely fair. I could entertain myself for the 80 minutes by trying to count how many times people light their pipes.
Well, like, I found this one, for example, more entertaining just to sit down and watch than, say, like British Agent.
I see that. This is what I sort of said in my topic. There's bits I liked about this film. It was okay to watch. I just didn't enjoy the watch. I think British Agent was actually a lot harder to watch. I think I was probably more frustrated sitting through that than I was this. And I think if we're going to sort of maybe mosey on over to the things we liked, I think that when this film shines, it's when it's with its secondary cast.
Yeah.
We didn't really mention off the top, but Peter Lorre's in this film.
Yeah, and he's great.
I can't name a Peter Lorre performance I didn't like. And once again, he outshines his own police commissioner, or whoever that guy is. He is. And there's a reason why Peter Lorre is featured on the poster for this film, and his boss isn't.
Yeah, because in this he plays a member of Imperial Intelligence.
Sure.
Who are basically the threat looming over George Sanders in the movie. Like, will they discover who he is? And I like how the movie really does tackle the whole bureaucracy of like them wanting to find him out, but how they're kind of butting heads with like, the prince who gets in the way and is kind of a bumbler. And just like there's all these various elements all butting up against each other that kind of help explain the success of the George Sanders character. It doesn't feel like a movie where this kind of like, how there's like so many of these movies we've seen where it's someone who's not really a spy is sent in as a spy and kind of just succeeds because they're kind of smart and circumstances work out okay. In this case, I could kind of buy that all these, various German people that could expose him are all butting heads and distracted with their own little battles and infighting, that he could succeed in what he's doing. It actually made sense to me.
It does make sense, but I also think it hinders the film a little bit because from a sort of storytelling perspective, your lead is not driving the story. Your lead is kind of a passenger to everyone else's choice. And for me, it's harder to sort of root for someone when they're literally just sat back eating a bowl of goulash.
Well, like, his mission is to go and find out what like the German high command's plans are. Basically, for World War I. But like, what really is specifically his mission when he gets there?
I got the impression it was just to see what you can find. It was like putting the feelers out, which is Let's be fair. This film treats soldiers with a disposability that's frankly true and horrifying in its own little way. It's not really often mentioned, but they are just it's like meat into the grinder at some points in this film. And it's really unfortunate that it doesn't actually deal with any of those heavy subjects. It brushes the past. I mean, there's some deaths that happen later on in the film that are basically just off camera mentioned. That's quite unfortunate. But yeah, I just got the feeling he was sent there as just like, see what you can find and get back to us. Good luck. See you later.
Yeah, because he's doubling this, German officer that they have captured. So he would have a certain access through his social circles, and a lot of the movie is George Sanders' character going to social events, mingling with all these various high-powered German figures. But you don't get a lot of like mission-based stuff. It is somewhat, sometimes a little coincidental how things work out in his favor. It doesn't feel like there's a game plan. It's more just like, we're going to drop you here and see what happens.
Which I think probably leads into why I had problems with the character of George Sanders, which I'll get to in the dislikes. But if I'm going to point out things I did like, it's the side characters. It's stuff like Peter Lorre's Major Siegfried Gruning. I mean, he's not given too much to do, but whenever he's talking, it's classic Peter Lorre just doing weird things with his dialogue to be memorable and having strange speech patterns which always stand out. Also want to shout out to Fritz Feld, who we mentioned earlier, who plays Fritz Müller, which is George Sanders' sort of assistant. Basically, he plays like an assistant. And a small character part, but his moments always pop as he's just a bit strange.
Yeah.
I liked that. Yeah, so characters like that really pop. Also, the Maurice Moscovitch's General von Meinhardt. Again, just kind of this old bloke who's just sort of happy with his place in the world. I mean, he does have the world's most inconvenient heart attack.
That is amazing. Where they go to the love interest. Is it her house?
It's her house.
Daria Sunnels?
Yeah.
Yeah, Daria Sunnels, the character's name, Dolores Del Rio's character. And she's going to make goulash for George Sanders and this elderly gentleman. And like the elderly guy who loves his goulash eats it, drops dead of a heart attack, and the muted response to his death is amazing.
I wrote in my notes, they do absolutely nothing to help. I'm not saying CPR existed in 1937, but they're like, well, he's dead.
Not 1937. This is like 19... what
18,
year of this?
I suppose. 18, maybe 19.
During World War One, isn't it?
It's during World War One.
So, yeah. Because 18 is the end of the war, so...
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, 16, yeah. Well, I'm just glad modern medicine exists, because if I have a heart attack, I wouldn't want everyone in my house being like, well, guess he's dead, on to the next one.
But what's amazing, too, is, like, he dies. George Sanders' character is, like, kind of checking him, like, what happened? Dolores Del Rio walks out. Could not even, like, her pulse doesn't even quicken at all. It's just like, oh, he died, huh?
Well, I mean, she is a spy. One could suggest that her cooking is awful.
Well, I just thought she'd poison the goulash. I was like, that would make sense.
That would make sense, but it's never mentioned.
No, it's not. No.
And I will also point out, Cam and I both watched a version on YouTube, which we'll have a link to below, but it is slightly chopped down. I'm not saying there's anything missing from that scene in particular, but there's a couple of edits you'll notice if you watch that version that are very obvious, so maybe there was something there that we didn't see. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a bit where, for example, George Sanders gets sucker punched when he's made his escape from this prison. You know, part of his cover is he has to escape from a prison where the German is being held, and makes his way onto a boat and tries to get the boat to actually bring him to shore. And they sucker punch him and throw him off the boat and keep his money. But like the actual sucker punching was very clearly edited to shreds.
Yeah. There's a few moments like that. I'm not sure why, but hey, we'll take what version we can get. But Cam, any other likes you wanted to mention?
Well, I just wanted to double back on what you were saying about Peter Lorre, who I actually think he's not doing a lot. It's not like some of the other films we've tackled. Men Who Knew Too Much, for example. He's doing quite a bit throughout that movie and very memorable as a villain. But I thought the scenes with him and Sig Ruman as his superior officer, who's kind of this like blustering figure who, you know, the way the two of them play their scenes, it's very clear that Peter Lorre is the brains of this Imperial intelligence. And Sig Ruman's character, Lieutenant Colonel Gottfried Holland, he is the figurehead, it seems like, and the person who thinks he's in charge, but every time they cut back to Peter Lorre, he'll say things like, just leave it to me. Just leave it to me. And I love that sort of cool, calm, very calculating Peter Lorre. You don't get like a huge payoff to that character. There's no final confrontation with him and George Sanders. But I just thought, like, in terms of establishing a dynamic between two antagonists, this was really, really interesting stuff.
I will say, in Sig Ruman's Lieutenant Colonel Gottfried Holland's defense, he is the one who suspects George Sanders' Baron von Rollback as being a spy, because how on earth would he escape from this prison in, I think it was Bristol or somewhere like that in the UK? I don't think we have any prisons and castles here. I don't think we did in 1916 either, but you never know.
Oh, Medwick Prison in Norfolk?
Norfolk,
yeah.
Thank you.
Does that not exist?
I mean, I haven't visited it, Cam. I'm sorry.
Because I was going to ask if you'd done like a tour of Lancer spy locations since you'd watched it.
You turn up at the prison tour and they're like, well, you know, we filmed quite a few films here. I'm like, excuse me, where's the Lancer spy scenes?
Has Croydon Airport changed much?
I don't think Croydon Airport's much used anymore. It's definitely not an international airport that's used in London. It may still be an airstrip that's used, much like one near my house, but yeah, it's not one people use for commercial traffic.
You guys are just stripping away the history of Lancer Spy over there.
At least you pronounced Croydon correctly. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. But and speaking of the Gottfried Holland character, like you were just saying, some defense for him. Something else that's interesting is he actually does almost get one over on on the Sanders character, where he does come up with a plan to basically sacrifice one of his own agents who's embedded with the British.
Mm-hmm.
And Sanders almost falls for it. It's a last-minute save that we'll get to in the dislikes that ultimately doesn't let, this German intelligence officer succeed, but he is successful in his own way. It's just very showy. Like, he'll play drunk and be this kind of, like, rambunctious character, whereas, like, Peter Lorre is just, like, this ice-cold assassin type. And I think, honestly, like, I would watch a whole movie just about these two's, like, working relationship.
It's a real, like, double act, isn't it? It's I'd like to see what they get up to, what spy jinx they can do, because they're meant to be a spy agency. I got the impression, because when they're doing a salute to them, it's like, the men who make spies quiver in their boots or something like that.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. Yeah,
the Lancer spy follow up we never got.
Yeah, and there's like this kind of headbutting between the intelligence service, the military, and then this like ruler, the prince or whatever.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about the whole royal family of Germany or whatever it was implied. I'm not au fait when it comes to German politics, particularly. I don't know. I didn't know they had a royal family, or if they did, I don't know. But it does seem to be like, well, there is a prince in the film and things like that. So I guess there is some sort of royalty at this point.
I was in the same boat as you. I wasn't sure, but I just accepted that the prince had power over them, and the prince was also a bit of a goofball.
I mean, I wish you stopped punching me in the face and stealing my money and throwing me off the boat, but...
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources. Whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a top secret volcano lair, we're putting out the call for your support.
That's right. As you may know, we've activated the SpyHards Patreon, home of our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors and full film commentaries with more intel than a Basil exposition briefing.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
April's over, so now it's time to play catch-up with episodes on Escape from New York, Psycho, and the latest edition of The Debrief. Do you accept the assignment?
And if that sounds delicious, then become a true spy hard today and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy jinx.
Something I liked about the film was I actually thought there was some genuine tension when you had the Sanders character of Michael Bruce going on the run at the end to escape.
Yeah.
All of his stuff about trying to reach the border and get to freedom. I mentioned it earlier. The action doesn't necessarily hold up through 2023 eyes. There's a lot of fast cranking the camera to make the car chase look like it's really fast. When it looks, you could picture Benny Hill music being played over top of it.
Some plonky keys in the background, yeah.
Yeah, but I appreciated that they were creating an action sequence, and it actually had some interesting elements where he's crashing the car to get away from them and then disappearing into the swamp, elements like that. I thought the sequence of him on the train was actually quite effective and had one of my favorite unintentionally hilarious moments. We have a few of these on the show where characters, going back to the Macintosh Man, out of nowhere just dive off of vehicles. And George Sanders has a moment in this movie where he's trying in disguise to escape to Switzerland. And he's on this train and he's posing as like a porter, and he goes in to help an old couple or whatever, through his cover, and then sees that the Germans have gotten onto the train, are investigating, and he goes in, pulls that brake, and just dives out that window like nobody cares.
He doesn't even stop to like maybe open the window. He is just going straight through it. I mean, I do love using that Macintosh Man gif online sometimes, but this may be the updated version.
We've got a couple recently because we had James Mason like being like, there he goes, and then they look out the window and they see him like running through the courtyard,
sprinting away. And then there was also one in like Murderer's Row or The Silencers, something like that, where they jumped out the hovercraft window.
That's right, yes. But I thought this one was truly amazing.
It's a hell of a stunt.
Yeah, and just all the tension of that entire escape sequence, the way it leads up to him being found by those like, the priests at the monastery, and having that realization that he's in Switzerland, I actually thought was a pretty effective emotional moment for George Sanders. I thought that really worked.
That did actually work for me too. That was a nice moment with the St. Bernards finding him and stuff as well. And he's thinking he's like vicious dogs that's chasing after him, but it's just two cuddly St. Bernards.
Yeah.
But I will also say that at that point in the train, the film just becomes the 39 steps for about 10 minutes.
That is true. Yes, it does a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, jumps out the train, gets away from the train and runs through the moors for a while.
There was one bit during the escape, though, where he posed as like a shell-shocked soldier.
Yeah.
And I was like initially like, what is he doing? What is
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Pull up, George.
It wasn't until like the German soldier said, "Oh, he's shell-shocked." I was like, whew, okay.
I could have ended that review very quickly. Yeah, that could have gone badly. But yeah, I think that's me sort of wrapped up for likes.
Yeah, I mean, I think more positive on George Sanders. I think he would go on to do far more dynamic work than he's going to do in this movie. But I think he's a pretty good audience avatar character once he's, enmeshed in this mission. I also thought he was actually pretty good as the German that he's posing as. Like, he plays dual roles, and I thought both of them were pretty distinct and seemed like different individuals. And it speaks to this guy that this was his first starring vehicle that he pulls that off.
I will just say that this is perhaps a little bit mean and a little bit below the belt, but I wrote it down in my notes, so I feel compelled to talk about it. George Sanders in that German uniform with the high collar, and then he's got the haircut that basically removes all of his, like a fade at the sides, basically all skin on the sides.
Yeah.
He looks just like the thumbs from Spy Kids.
Wow.
I couldn't get it out of my head. Maybe that's why I had so much trouble watching him, because I just imagine him sort of running around and bumping into walls.
I just have so much goodwill for George Sanders that maybe I was just really excited to see him in a role that's quite different than what I'm typically familiar with seeing him do. Like, it felt like a real novelty to me to have George Sanders as the lead in a spy film playing, an undercover operative who's like also a soldier. Like, these aren't the sorts of roles that I typically think of when I think of him. He's pretty famous for playing like cads a lot of the time.
Listen. If this episode somehow falls on the desk of the George Sanders fan club, I'm sorry. I'm sure he is a wonderful person, actor, philanthropist, all the nice things a person could be. But in this film, it didn't work for me.
That's fair. And you know what? Maybe this is his first professional leading man role. So maybe if you were to see the evolution, you'd go, oh man, he really grew into something I appreciate, but I found his initial role a little rocky. I think had more of a novelty factor for me because it's not something I'm typically used to seeing him do.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think we've definitely tackled the extraordinary side of this film, but let's look at the unextraordinary parts of this film. I think we both mentioned the love affair. That is really the one to talk about off the top here.
Yeah, and it's notable, Dolores Del Rio is the number one billed actor in the film. We really haven't spoken that much about her. And it's because this character is an absolute mess.
Yep.
I don't know what's going on with this character. She's introduced initially as being the romantic partner of Michael Bruce's
romantic partner.
long-term of Michael Bruce's cover, character, which is this Baron Kurt von Robach figure that he's posing as. So her and Robach apparently have this long relationship. Now, you gotta accept that she's gonna not recognize that this man isn't her partner, which I think in real life anyone would. But nonetheless, I'm willing to put that aside. It's a movie convention I've seen a billion times. Face Off, famously, of course. But, in that case, I was, okay, that's fine. And then we find out she doesn't actually know him. And then I'm going, oh, this is even better. She doesn't actually know who he is. That's actually more interesting. And that she's posing as someone who fell in love with him because he's being used as this propaganda tool. Again, a good concept. I like that he was like this turned into this big propaganda tool, this homecoming hero or something. Thought that was great.
There's smart things here, and I think a lot of it comes back to that original book.
Yeah.
She clearly knew what she was talking about.
Yeah, that stuff, great. So then you find out she doesn't actually know him. Works for me. Then we find out she's an agent, And I'm leaning forward. I'm like, that's even more interesting. They have actually pulled back on something that I thought was going to be very clunky and are turning it into something that's quite interesting, where she's an agent who has a real sense of the lay of the land, could pose a threat to him. Then there is a pivot out of nowhere with no buildup whatsoever, where she basically, as you said, sells out her country, clues him in about this plot that the Imperial intelligence is going to use to expose him, and sacrifices not only her standing as an agent, also ultimately her life for him with nothing. There's no foundation for a romance. We've talked about awkward romances, or at least haphazard romances, in some older films where you kind of just got to accept that people fall in love very quickly. This wasn't quick. This was like skipping over the work.
It was just asking us as an audience to just accept they were in love without laying any foundation whatsoever. And I think about a film we've spoken about recently, The Emperor's Candlesticks. That has a love affair that comes quite late in the game at the cost of what could have been their lives. There are stakes involved. But it does a much better job at sticking the landing of the stakes involved of them betraying their countries for each other. Dolores Del Rio's character turns on a dime. It's not like it's not even like it's not earned. It just doesn't make any sense. You could have the exact same outcome without having them in love.
Yeah.
She could just understand that her position is fraught and she should give away intel to try and help the Allied position by getting this information back to England, because she can't get the information back, or like keeping this spy in the game, George Sanders, makes more sense for her cover than blowing his cover, because they might ask questions about her and then she gives him the intel. Making them in love makes absolutely zero sense for the film. You sit there going, what is this? And then they say, like, because this film is so short, about 10 minutes later, oh yeah, she was killed off screen.
Yeah.
What is the point? And also, I take major umbrage with the outfit she chooses to cook goulash in. I don't dress very well. You are watching me on camera now, Cam. I'm sorry. Listeners at home only have to hear my annoying voice. I wear a lot of lounge pants. I don't go out much. That's fine. This lady is cooking goulash in... She's not dressed to the 9s. She's dressed to the 10s.
Or the 11s in Spinal Tap vernacular.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's a little nitpick, but I don't know. I found it completely bizarre. And so I just felt then they clearly didn't care what the character was doing. It was more just about having Dolores Del Rio in the film.
Yes. I mean, star of the era. They clearly recognize her glamour potential because they make her look like $1 million in every scene. There's like big dance numbers and stuff like that where they're really showing her off. And it's like, my issues aren't even with her performance. She's fine.
No?
I think she definitely brings movie star, wattage to this thing, because George Sanders, unproven as a lead, makes sense to have someone who is much more of that, bright shining star at the center of it. So she's great in that regard, but like in terms of the writing of this character, it does not hold up at all. I can look past, say, like the very fast romance of British Agent or a movie like that, because I go, yeah, in those days, it's like if you're going to make a movie with a male and a female character, they're going to fall in love at some point. But at least that one, give me some violins and a moment, like a tender moment that shows that the characters are falling in love on a dime. And I'll go, got it. I'm with it. Okay. Oh, you're proposing already? Makes sense to me. Sure, go for it.
Life is very short in the 30s, man. You got to get on it.
That's right. This movie, though, doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you that moment where they really look at each other, some music swells, and you get a sense of, like, the evolution of their relationship. It is just like, snap your fingers, it just happened.
You think of a film of the year or something like Notorious in the next decade. That's a frosty relationship that falls into a love affair, and it's earned. It's paved its path from point A to point B. This doesn't even jump. It teleports from A to B. It sticks a lance through credibility of the film. It's a really, really rough choice, and I just don't understand it. And I have to think that, I mean, obviously this is a made-up story by the author, and then probably changed by the writer/writers of the film. I would almost suggest that the original story of the book had more time for the relationship, if that does indeed feature in the book,
Yeah.
and probably gives it more time to breathe and feel more earned by the time she does give up her entire livelihood for this guy she's known all of 2 days.
And this movie has bookends on it where you have like Michael Bruce's superior officer sitting on a plane explaining to this female passenger about who this man is on the plane. You don't see him at that point. And they use that as sort of a teaser and then flash back 2 years ago and then tell the events of the film. You go back to the end and we get this, officer pointing to this woman and saying, there he is. And it's Michael Bruce going to lay flowers on, Dolores Darius Sonnell's grave like he does every year. And I'm like, that's your story. Your story is about the guilt he feels, the connection they had together, why this, because we learn about Michael Bruce. He's married, he has a child, he has a life. It's not like this is a single guy being sent in on a mission. You have to understand how he feels such a powerful connection to this female spy in the field and feels compelled, like he has to go back and leave those flowers every year. And the movie did not give me that. That ending was so unearned.
And this will pivot me slightly into my big dislike that I want to mention. But I'll also tag it onto what you were just saying, because George Sanders' character is in the British military. It's war. He, of course, is in the military. But he is, his death is faked so he can go undercover. They tell his wife and child at home, who briefly feature in the film, that he's dead. They fake his death. I don't know if he can actually go back to his real life after this. So there is, and there's a genuine sense of heartbreak from him at one point when he realizes the life that he has known is over. And the wife also plays a part later on when the Germans are investigating him in England. But and this sort of leads me into my problem. This film has two contrasting tones that don't seem to mesh. And this line has been walked before much better. But at times this film wants to be like a yuck comedy. You've got, the two guys with their shirts off fencing in the field.
What was that?
And like the prince is like, oh, don't let them stop. We're just having fun. And there's a little bit of coding there with that character, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Not particularly covert there. And all these kinds of like farcical scenes that he's getting himself into. The Fritzfeld Mueller character that plays his like assistant is bemused at one point because his boots are shiny all of a sudden and he's getting reamed out for that. Bizarre moments. Jumping out the window. Crazy moment. But then it like pivots to this sense of tragedy that the film wants to have at the same time. All within the space of less than 80 minutes.
It's a bit of an ask.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just feels like it, you could flesh this out to be a little more coherent in terms of its emotional journey. But at the same time, it's totally like a 80-minute programmer or something like that. Like, I get why it exists in the form it does, and I try not to hold that against the movie. But I just think the movie's asking a lot of the audience at a certain point, and it just doesn't quite deliver just enough to really warrant that.
You can't ask me to care and then tell me jokes.
Sure.
Like, I just feel like they don't blend, or maybe I'll take it back. There's been films that have blended serious and comedy many times, and a lot of like TV shows I watched. Scrubs is always a prime example of one week it's jokes off every scene, and then the next episode it's cracking at your heartstrings. It can be done. This film just doesn't walk that line very well.
Well, you look at how Hitchcock balances the two, right? Like the 39 Steps, you're never thinking to yourself, there's no danger here. Whatever. This is just a lark. Like, he actually has tension to it, even though there's some very funny stuff. You have the two characters handcuffed to each other in a hotel overnight. And that's an example of a whirlwind romance where you actually get character building so you can at least go along with the journey.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get that here. This movie just feels like it's throwing in the elements. I will say for me, it didn't bother me quite maybe as much as you, where at least the espionage story of it all somewhat worked. In terms of his personal journey, the George Sanders character's beginning, middle, and end, I was like, this mostly works for me.
It's just, you create these situations where you're trying to feel some sort of sympathy for your lead character. Like he's technically just lost his wife and child.
Yeah.
From being forced on this mission. He didn't choose the mission. And then it's telling you jokes the next scene, and I just think you've not allowed the baggage of that problem to be carried by the character. He's just forgotten it the next scene. He doesn't once mention his wife again. He isn't. There's not a scene of him going, "I wish I was at home," or I miss bread and butter. I miss kidney pie.
Or no conflict between maybe burgeoning feelings for the Dolores Del Rio character and then knowing he has a wife and child at home. You don't get that sort of inner workings of what he's experiencing, at least emotionally, with the Dolores character.
Which is done better in another film we tackled some time ago. Was it Confidential Agent with Lauren Bacall?
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the lead actor. Is it Charles Boyer?
Charles Boyer, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, it's all coming back to me now. And that's, he had a wife and child, I think, that were killed. And he didn't really want to take a lover for a while. And then his walls are broken down eventually by Lauren Bacall. And they eventually form a very brief love affair at the very end of the film. Like, it's earned. It's like one of the last scenes they basically fall in love.
Yeah, like the Lauren Bacall character didn't really work for me in that movie. But the movie does acknowledge the seriousness of his past and how he is having trouble getting over those feelings to actually open himself up to a relationship with her. This movie skips all that sort of stuff. It does feel like they really just kind of, and I don't know if that's the case with the original script, but it feels like they almost edited out all the character building stuff in favor of just the espionage plot.
And some action.
Yeah.
That's a shame. That is a shame. Have you any more dislikes you want to bring up?
I think my only other dislike I could really say is this movie does have certain themes about the inhumanity of the war machine and how they will just grind people up. You don't really get a lot of payoff to it. I think the movie could have dug a little deeper, but again, going back to what I just said, it's like an 80-minute movie that's pretty much refined down to a spy plot, so not a lot of time for that kind of depth.
Yeah, and I want to tackle the knock list question in a minute, but let's look at any final notes that we have. I have a couple of sort of question notes, if you're happy to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, the major conceit of this film is that George Sanders characters have a likeness to each other. And there is basically a double of him living in Germany that he assumes the position of. Now, do you think there's a double of Cam Smith out there? And if so, where is he and what is he doing?
Okay, I actually have some actual, maybe SpyHards specific references for that answer.
Wow.
I'll say first off, it has happened to me multiple times in my life where people have come up to me and approached me and then been like, "Are you so-and-so?" And they'll throw out a name and I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Oh, you look just like him." I've heard that a number of times in my life, which means I'm very generic. But that
I could have told you that, brother. I could have told you that.
That sort of anecdote, I'm sure lots of people have had that.
Sure.
When I was in Las Vegas at the Star Trek convention, I was waiting in line for a photo op, and someone came up to me and approached me.
Said, "Hey, you're Walter Koenig."
No, not Walter Koenig. As I said, SpyHards specific.
Oh.
They came up to me and said, "Excuse me," and they looked nervous. And I said, "Yeah, what is it?" And they said, Are you Rami Malek?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "For Mr. Robot?" And this is around the Mr. Robot era. This isn't, the No Time to Die era. This is before that. And I just was like, no, sorry, I'm not him. And he said, "Are you his twin brother?" Because I know he has a twin brother. That's pretty well known. And I said, "No, sorry, no relation whatsoever." And the guy looked a little bummed out to walk away from me.
Where do you go with the conversation after that?
Yeah, I know. I don't really see it. Although that said, my sister has made fun of me for a number of years now for looking like him. She'll often, if he shows up at like an awards ceremony or something like that, the Oscars, Emmys, anything like that, she'll screen cap him on the red carpet and send it to me and be like, "What are you doing on the red carpet right now?"
I imagine you still get that like every award season now. And you're like, "Yep, that joke's still going."
Yeah, it's been a running joke for a number of years for my sister, yes.
So I've been meaning to ask you though, what was it like to work with Daniel Craig in No Time to Die?
Wonderful. Just what a gem. What a treat. We went out for pastries together. Oh, what a joy.
At least that solves our issue of getting interviews together for No Time to Die.
It's just me on the view screen.
View screen?
View screen. That's a Star Trek on the Zoom, I should say.
Red alert.
Yeah, red alert.
There it is. Okay, well that's you actually. That's a very good answer, and I stare at your face at least about 3 or 4 hours every week, and I can say firmly, you don't look anything like Rami Malek.
You don't see it either, huh?
No.
Yeah, some people do and some people don't.
I'm very good with faces. I actually am very good with faces, and I don't see it.
I've also gotten Fred Savage in the past when I was younger, but not so much now.
I don't know who that is.
He was on the TV show The Wonder Years. Maybe that didn't carry over there.
No. Well, I mean, I have an actual answer to my own question, but if we're talking like celebrity lookalikes, when I had longer hair, and people would let me know if they want me to post a photo, people used to say I look like David Spade.
Okay, I can. It's like I would say no, but at the same time, I'm like, well, I can kind of see that a little bit, enough to like, yeah, that I would understand why people would say that.
You have experience, Scott, with long hair, short hair, and now no hair, so you've seen it all.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I'm sure you pine for the days of the flowing locks.
Boy, do I.
As do I. As do I. I've got one more note, but I'll throw it to you first. What have you got?
I actually had a question for you. At a certain point in the movie, George Sanders' character, as you said, the cover is he's dead. And they put on the front page of the newspaper a photo of him that says lost at sea. If you, in your agent training, had your death faked, what does the newspaper headline say?
Oh. I want something really fancy, like eaten by alligators.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Or a cut in half with a laser beam.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, like just I want a death that no one's ever had published in a newspaper.
I mean, I don't care if mine's that original. Just give me like the great white shark death or something.
Yeah, you want that send off, don't you?
I do. And I know that like anyone who knew me in life, even though it's a fake story, is seeing that headline, they'll never forget me. They will always be like, remember when Cam was eaten by a great white shark? Like, what's so weird?
And they're like, who? And the guy's like, yeah, the guy looks like Rami Malek.
That's also true, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'd go for like a laser beam or something quite Bondy. Although I think I will at some point post a photo of the Lost at Sea newspaper clipping against the Sean Connery newspaper clipping from You Only Live Twice.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, good call.
Yeah, I don't think he's killed at sea in that. I think he's just
buried.
dead.
Yeah, buried at sea.
Yeah. My second question is, I mentioned earlier on, but George Sanders' character of Baron von Robach, his nickname is Putzi. Now, I don't know my German. If there's any German-speaking listeners, do let us know if Putzi has any meaning or it's like a derivative of another word, Putzi. But is that one of the crappiest nicknames you've ever heard?
I couldn't understand what they were saying, actually, for a while. I was like, are they saying Bootsy? And then I was like, Putzi? And I'm writing various spellings down with question marks next to them in my notes. So, that is a pretty bad nickname. If I can't even pick up what it is exactly, it's not great. But also, it's just a bad nickname, and I want to apologize to anyone who has that nickname in life. By the way,
yeah. Any Putsies out there, we love you. You're putting up with a lot right now.
Yeah,
you're putsying up with a lot right now. Including our extended puns. Cam, do you have any more notes for us?
The only thing that jumped out to me that I also made a note on was that when Michael Bruce and his assistant get to shore after being kicked off the boat, they pull themselves up, and there's like the sign that says like to Berlin, 437 kilometers, and they're like, well, we're here. And I was like, wait, how are they going to navigate that distance? This is like the 19-teens. This is going to take a while.
Do you think they hitchhiked their way to Berlin?
Is it like hitchhike mixed with train, I suppose? He arrived on a train.
Well, they'd already found him by that point because he had the hero's welcome, so they already knew he'd landed. So he must have like turned up at the police station or a military base and gone from there.
Yeah, I just kind of laughed when they're like, well, here we are. Start walking.
And he started like whistling hi-ho, or whatever the German version is of that.
Yeah.
My last note was more of a question as well, We've obviously tackled a few films from the 1930s now. Where does this sort of fall amongst the bunch?
I would put 39 Steps is definitely then number 1. Man Who Knew Too Much, the original, is probably number 2. This one's kind of like lower middle tier. I would put it above British Agent, and maybe The Emperor's Candlesticks. That one was a little wonky in places, but I don't know. Like, none of them were bad. I don't think we've hit a 30s one yet where I'm like, oh my god. There's no like 1930s Spy Kids 3 or 4 where it is just torture to get through. They're all pretty watchable. This one just doesn't have the kind of the better qualities that you see even in a kind of a mid-tier movie like Mata Hari.
I definitely struggle with British Agent a lot more than this.
Yeah.
But I think I had more fun with Emperor's Candlestick or Mata Hari or the Hitchcocks than this, though. So I think it's going underneath all of those.
Okay.
It's not the bottom, but nowhere near the top.
No, I agree. It's kind of that just above the bottom, but not quite the bottom.
The best place to be.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Cam, it's 11 p.m. It's my favorite time of the day. It's goulash time, and therefore, let's talk about the knock list. What do you think?
Well, we did just rank it, so I think that's pretty much given away, so let's not belabor it. No, it is not making the knock list. Lancer Spy, check it out on YouTube. It's available, but this is not one of the all-time great spy films.
No, it's 80 minutes, folks. It can't be that bad, can it? Maybe it is, but there's things to enjoy there. I think the film doesn't rise to its own potential. The story is interesting. I think it could have been better delivered. I think it actually could have been remade later to more success. The story actually could still track now if someone wanted to make a film out of it. It's definitely got some legs. Unfortunately, it's also got a thumb in a uniform. So, mixed results, unfortunately. It's a no from me.
And when you look at some of the other 30s ones we've tackled, some have aged better than others. This one does feel a little creakier in comparison to the Hitchcock stuff or Mata Hari.
It's definitely a cut and paste studio film made on a low budget or medium-sized budget and just sort of put out in a very small space of time.
Yeah.
It's all on sets practically. I don't think there's any location shooting apart from maybe the bit in Berlin.
The Escape, probably.
Yeah, the escape with the water and stuff, but that's all probably like just on a set, like just the side of a soundstage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. But hey, if you're following along with us and you're watching every film, we salute you. I'm sure you'll probably agree with our thoughts on the film. But there you go, folks. 2 no's, and as such, Lancer Spy is not making the knock list. The dossier on the film is complete and filed, as usual, as classified. Cam, I'm going to bat the question back to you now. What are we talking about next week?
Well, it's back to Bond Town, baby. We are tackling 2015's Spectre.
Yes, indeed. Do you like sepia filters and do you like James Bond? Well, this may well be the perfect film for you. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week as we tackle 2015's Blofeld-filled Spectre. And if you like what you heard on this show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And do not forget to follow us discreetly, of course, on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, Cam, draw my bath and polish my boots.